well.
We're in for a really special experience, and I know I've said special a lot today because it just feels that way, special. But what's going to happen now is we're going to have a panel, a selection of people. We're going to have some clinicians, practitioners, consumers, carers, a really good, healthy cross-sector of opinion and voices. And what's happening is, as you are sitting here, away in another room are the facilitators and the scribes of the last session, beavering away to distill down and consolidate the thoughts of all of the groups that took place before lunch. They're not here, but I'd like us to recognise all of the people that participated and also facilitated and scribed. Can we give them a round of applause, please? And what I'd like to do is a bit of a slow reveal, because it sounds somewhat sexy, right? Now, this slow reveal is to ask panel members to come and join us one at a time on the stage. And this is where I'm going to have my moment to fulfil a fantasy this afternoon. I'm going to pretend I'm a hybrid of a Jenny Brock, Tony Jones, and maybe Jeffrey Robinson at a push. Okay, and what's going to happen is that this is going to be a highly interactive session with the panel. So your thoughts are being distilled down from the conversations that took place in the other rooms. Those points will be put together in a simple overhead of 8 points maximum. Our panel will join us, and they're going to talk about their views, their opinions about those distilled points that will be raised. And then it's over to you. We're going to have some Q&A. But can I do a bit of a Tony Jones on you and ask you, please have questions. And if you can give me permission to say that favourite phrase of his, which is what? I'll take that as a comment. All right? Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's meet our panel this afternoon. Can I introduce Ruth Vine firstly, please? Now, Ruth, as you make your way to the allocated seat there, I'm going to give you a microphone. Excellent. Ruth, do you mind me calling you Ruth? No. All right. Ruth, we know in your role, let me get this correct here, Chief Psychiatrist, Department of Health Victoria, that's a big, big responsibility for you.
Is that a statement or a question?
I'll take it as a comment. Ruth, borderline personality disorder, where does it fit through your lens right now?
Well, firstly, I'd say it's alive and well and real. So that's I think the first thing I'd say. We in my office spend a lot of time dealing with service interactions, service to service, person to service, carer to service, whatever. And it is not uncommon for those sort of interactions to involve the family of someone who has a borderline personality disorder, or to involve the person. And of course, my office also deals with when things go wrong and when tragic events occur. And so I have to say sometimes that figures as well. So it's certainly an area that I've had an interest in for a long time. We work very closely with Spectrum. We rely a lot on Spectrum. And it's an area that I think there's so much more to learn about, and I'm sure we will keep learning about it, and particularly learn about effective treatment modalities and effective types of intervention and how the service system can get better at it. How long can I go for? The hour and a half?
No. I think Ruth's doing a brilliant job.
If I can say one more thing. I've been working in mental health since probably the mid-80s, and I would like to say that over that time, over those sort of, whatever that is, 25 years, is it that long? Yeah, anyway, over a long time, how people have worked with or thought about or what sort of treatment service system responses have been put in place to try and manage the sort of behaviours or the sort of distressed emotions or whatever that go with a borderline personality diagnosis has changed enormously. Sometimes, some bits much for the better, some bits not so much for the better. But I think that's the other thing that would be nice to learn. You take away the positives from the past, but lose some of the negatives, and there certainly were some negatives in the past.
And Ruth, we were talking just a little bit earlier, and I think one of the things that I'm finding personally so absolutely exciting is the fact that this is a conference that welcomes in a really fair and equitable way consumers, carers, clinicians, practitioners, workers in one place. We need more of that? The answer would be yes.
Well, and I think it should be the norm, shouldn't it? I mean, this is also quite a big room, and sometimes it's hard to fit every group into every sized room, but of course that makes for a more rich conversation.
Terrific, thank you. Ruth, you can have a seat now. Thank you very much. Can we give Ruth a round of applause, please? Merinda, you're the buddy of Ruth, sitting right next door. Do you reckon Merinda's got more to say? I reckon. Let me give you that to hold on to. Merinda, we heard from you earlier today, and I've heard lots and lots of great feedback and comments about the way that you expressed yourself and absolutely represented the voices of those that have suffered in the past. How important is it for you that the conversation keeps continuing on in this sort of forum?
I think it's important that the conversation keeps happening, but what I really want to see happen is that provision in a whole lot of different ways for people with this horrible label happens. I mean, the conversation's important too, and I want to keep talking about it, but don't forget I've been talking about it for 20 years, so there's a time at which some action...
Yeah.
I need to tell you a little bit, there's a service in that I've been watching grow in the United Kingdom, where it's a non-government organisation, and they've created a little local workshop money-making scheme of making stained glass, and beautiful stained glass things, and with people who would otherwise before use glass to cut themselves.
Oh, fantastic.
And it's funded by the mental health system in the UK, and that's one of the exciting things that makes me so excited with where we could go. And I want to do that rather than only just put emphasis on the negative things.
Okay,
That's
fantastic.
my feeling.
Thank you. So let's stop talking, let's start doing, and let's be a bit more innovative in the way we
We've
do
got to
it.
still talk. I think that if the talking stops, the whole thing can ground into routine nothingness and disappear. So we've got to keep talking, that's important too, but let's get some really new, exciting, different things off the ground. Even at that first they're just pilots. I'm not a great fan of pilots, but just to start us off doing things very, very differently, and so that people, like, the stuff that's okay for me might not be okay for someone else. There has to be variety and some choice.
Merinda, I've met a couple of pilots that are a bit of spunky actually in the past, but just it's my thing.
There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. Please take a seat. Okay, next can we please welcome to the stage Senator Claire Moore. Senator Moore. Claire, don't you just love it, Claire? Okay, Claire, here's a microphone for you. This morning we've heard so much rich information and we've heard it from different perspectives. Where are you at now with this whole borderline personality disorder, and what would you like to see happen in the future, perhaps?
Well, one of the real joys of my job is the fact that I get the opportunity to hear this kind of information pretty regularly. So this morning I heard so much, but I heard it from people, many of whom I'd known and spoken with before. And the first time I heard of this thing called borderline personality disorder was when I was lucky enough to be on the Senate Select Committee on Mental Health, and Merinda came in late in the afternoon, sandwiched between... Absolutely, and I'm pretty sure Ruth was at the same hearing, and I'm pretty sure that Isabell was definitely at the same hearing, and I've met Eileen and, of course, Janne in other places. And Janne was not at that hearing, she was on one 2 weeks later. So Merinda came and she blew us away. I mean, there were 7 senators there, some of whom had more knowledge than others, but when she came in and talked about, in very much the same way she did this morning, her own experience, the experience of people she'd known, and the pain that was there, it was overwhelming. And I think from all of us who are on that committee, it's one of our great memories of that process, and we aren't going to let it go. And that's one of the reasons that the work Janne has done by coming to lobby us, and also numbers of other people, the amazing work that's done at Origin with the team there, we actually value that so much. And what we want to see happen is to continue with the discussion, continue with the sharing, and make a real difference.
Thank you very much. Please make yourself welcome at the seat there. Robyn. Now, I saw Robyn speak a little while ago, and this is a lady that knows the front line. Is that okay to say that? Yes? Good. You've spent so much time with so many families, very close, directly related to many sorts of situations. From a, can I call it a worker's perspective? Is that appropriate for me to share that term?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say I used to be a worker, now I'm a manager.
Okay. Hey, workers.
But I think I can still remember.
Yeah. Some workers are going, you probably need the worker now, you're a manager. Okay. Robyn, as a manager and a manager of people that are providing service very hands-on and in a very direct way, how important is it, do you think, that we have conversations with workers around new information, new research, again, hearing the lived experience from very different perspectives? How important do you think that?
Of course it's important. It's also very difficult. And one of the things I've been thinking about today, we're all saying we need more education, more training. It's very difficult to keep a workforce in the service I manage, for example, of more than 200 people, fully up to date all the time with what is best practice. And so the approach we try to take is kind of a layered approach. So I would expect everyone who works in the Northern Area Mental Health Service to have a positive and hopeful and respectful attitude towards any diagnosis, any person with any diagnosis, but we want to be a friendly service and a helpful service. We don't want to do harm. And then you would go you'd have another layer of workers who are have some tools in their toolkit that enable them to do the work a bit differently, and you also need experts, you need specialists, and that's the kind of structure that we not only we take in our approach not only to borderline personality disorder, but to a number of other kind of specialist or special areas within the work we do.
So being able to deliver on the services is not enough. It's got to be in conjunction with up-to-date practices, views, education, etc., that can be applied within those services.
It's everything, and you need to have a system and an organisational structure that supports the work as well.
Okay. 200 staff? Go have a seat. Okay. Please. Okay. Give her a round of applause. Thank you. Oh, can I introduce, please, Julien Leith? And if you haven't met Julien yourself in person, do yourself a favour. Meet Julien, because this is a lady that works tirelessly, particularly in the area of supporting carers. So, Julien, here's a mic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, do you want me to run through the workshop high points now
Hold that
or later?
thought. Hold that thought, because we want to know about her, don't we? A little bit about her first? Yes.
Okay.
All right. Julien, you've had a long career in the community sector, is that correct?
Certainly have.
Yes. And now heading up as the CEO or the
Executive
Director
of the Victorian Mental Health Carers Network, which is the peak body for carers of mentally ill people in Victoria.
And if no one knows very much about that, there are brochures and there's tables out the front there today. And Julien, you're a huge part of making this happen today. What we're going to ask is, how important is it for carers to be up to date with views, ideas and support strategies for them? We've heard a lot today about how important families, for example, are.
Yeah, well, look, in the carers workshop, which I was just involved in, it just came out as hugely important that they're really needing to be, to have information, to have education, to have skill development so that they can be of help in the situation. However, they also recognise that there can be situations where the immediate family may not be the people to be involved, because sometimes, as we've talked about, there's been particular sorts of traumas whereby the consumer may want other parts of their network involved. But the important thing then is that those people may be regarded as carers, significant others, and whoever is involved does need to know what's going to help, what's not going to help, and they're also going to need information about the whole situation, because otherwise it's very difficult, particularly around discharge. And we've heard lots of stories of difficulties there because people aren't involved, they don't get the information, and they don't know how to be of help.
Okay, thank you. So what we will do is get you to take a seat there, and maybe you can then take us through once we've introduced the rest of the panel. All right, can we say thank you to Julien, please? You've got
We've got Janne McMahon joining the panel.
Okay. All right. Eileen's come all the way from interstate, and Eileen and I have done a little bit of work together in the past, and a buddy from the National Mental Health Consumer Carer Forum. Eileen, do you want to give us a little bit of an overview of your interaction with borderline personality disorder?
Okay. I've been a carer for over 30 years of family members with this label or diagnosis or whatever you want to call it. They have different words for it as well. And still in that position of being a carer. And I've been involved in advocacy and representation work for mental health across the board, but particularly in this area.
Okay, thank you very much. Please join the panel. Sue. Hello, Sue. Come on into the spotlight for you. All right. Sue, tell us a little bit about Sue.
Well, Sue's, I'm here as the CEO of Albert Road Clinic, which is one of our very good private hospitals in Victoria. I'm also representing the Australian Private Hospitals Association, because I think it's very important that we have a voice for the work that is done for patients, all our patients, but also particularly today for people with the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder.
Sue, have you been here for the full day so far?
I have.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. Any points in particular from this morning's speakers that resonated with you?
I think that probably every person has had something of value to say, and I think it informs the care that should be provided for patients. And I also think that one of the things that resonates too is the work of the carers, because I think that carers really take a lot of the burden. And I also think the professional people that work sometimes in fairly unsupported practices probably take a lot of the burden also, and I don't think that's always recognised and supported.
Okay, thank you. Please join the panel. Can we thank Sue, please? Hello, Indigo. How are you? There you go. All right.
Microphone.
A microphone. How cool. Can I just say, there is something incredibly stunning about red and black, don't you think? Gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Okay. Now, tell us a little bit about what you can tell us about your experience so far with borderline personality disorder, or, in fact, the voice that you want to bring to the panel.
Okay. Well, borderline is one of quite a number of labels I've been given over the past 12 years or so, and certainly been, I guess, the most stigmatising and difficult label to sit with. And I guess I'm here today with kind of two hats on. I'm certainly here personally to hear what other people have to say, and I guess to share some of my views around my hope that that we can start to really work with the pain that sits underneath the sort of difficult behaviours that we so often work with. And in the group that we're in, we were talking about, I guess, a view I have that I feel like a lot of treatment is focused on finding socially acceptable ways to cope with our distress, rather than actually addressing the pain, the distress and the trauma that actually sits beneath that. And I think that's something really important that we haven't really grappled with. And I guess my other hat is that I manage a consumer-led program at per our mission called Voices Vic, and we work with people who hear voices. And our work's informed by the lived experience of those who have recovered. And I would really love to see with Borderline that we could get a similar initiative running where we have all of us who've had this label actually getting together to help each other to recover and learning from the experience of those of us who've made it through the journey.
Yeah, and hearing fantastic things about that program. So
we rock.
congratulations. She rocks. She rocks,
we
ladies
rock.
and gentlemen.
We rock.
And yeah, you do too. Grab a seat at the panel. Okay, Janne, we've got you coming up here, but we don't have a name for you. I know you know your name. If we tell everyone, will you remember Janne's name if she comes and sits up here as well? All right, great. So, Janne, why don't you come up next? Ladies and gentlemen, Janne McMahon. We've heard from Janne this morning, and fantastic advocacy work and lobbying on behalf of so many people. This is something you obviously feel very passionately about. We heard that this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's not just me, it's a lot of people who are doing a lot of good work and supporting us getting this disorder front and centre and just doing something about it. And I think we do need to ride on the passion of different individuals, certainly.
Okay, keep the passion coming. Thank you.
I've certainly been dropped off the table, but I do need to say I'll have to leave at 5 to catch a flight home. So
we'll let it go, won't we, at 5? Thank you. All right. The next lady coming up here, I'm going to call a mate, quite frankly, because that's how it feels to me. She's been a terrific mate and a great friend of mine, and I'd like to introduce Isabell Collins. And Isabell does an amazing job. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the potential support that you provide already to a lot of consumers at VMIAC?
I would like to say, because the department here is, we are grossly underfunded for the work that we do. And
but do you blame her? You have to use opportunities.
And most of the advocacy staff, for example, work 60 hours plus a week and have been doing so for some time because of their commitment, but also because of the demand for our services. And what we do is we provide an individual advocacy service, what we call a group advocacy service. So we establish consumer groups in the areas in which people live and meet with those groups on a monthly basis and provide them with support. The information we go with the individual advocacy, it's whole of life advocacy, but we do go into the inpatient units, talk to people about their rights and pick up the issues. The information we get from the individual and group advocacy becomes our systemic advocacy issues, which we feed back into the department in the hope that they will listen and take action on. They do for some, for others it moves very slowly. And we also provide education and training. And I have to say that as the boss of the VMIAC, I have the best staff you could ever have. And they are honest, they are hardworking, they are committed, and I think they do a great job.
Thanks, Izzy. Thank you. Isabell Collins, everyone. Come on up. I feel like the price is right. You're the last one down. Come on down, Dr. Sathya Rao. Here we go. Now, we had a little bit of a chat this morning, and you very candidly said there's still a lot more to learn this morning.
There is. I think if you had asked me now, I would say there is too much to learn.
Too much to learn.
Yes, it's as if what I learned all my life in psychiatry is not enough. Today has been a very humbling experience. Listening to Flick, listening to Merinda, listening to the carers and consumers, very humbling.
Yeah, thank you. We love a humble doctor. All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, singular here. There's a couple of microphones on the desk in front of you. And what I'm going to ask, please, is if we can share the mics down both ends of those tables where we need to. Julien, what I'd like of you to start with is to take us through, if you could, what was actually the consolidated thoughts of the workshops.
Okay. Well, we had about 8 points that we picked out of maybe 80, and all of those additional points will actually come out as a report from this conference. But just to highlight the 8 or so major ones, certainly training and skills development was a big one, including attitude change in that training and skill development. And that's across the board for basically everyone, we felt, from clinicians, teachers, first-line workforce, police, emergency department, families, carers. Basically, we felt everybody is really crying out for training and skill development. Many more such conferences as this, and this has been just a knockout. We never imagined we would have so many people putting up their hands. And we've got more than 100 on the waiting list who we couldn't have come today. So I think the need is clear. Also, strong support for a national alliance with consumers at the centre of that national alliance. So something like the American one, but there was a strong feeling that consumers really need to be a central part of such an alliance. And there were all sorts of ideas about what such an alliance could do. It's certainly been very successful in America. Community awareness campaigns was another strongly held item, and that was very much around awareness rather than culture change. There was agreement, as per what some of the speakers mentioned this morning, that the culture change needs to happen in the mental health services, but community awareness needs to be built via community education. Change of name, a lot of concern about the name, and consumers certainly want their experience recognised in any renaming of this disorder. Access to a national service system, sort of something like Spectrum, drawing on the strengths of Spectrum, but not necessarily just reproducing Spectrum. And certainly there needs to be better access across all of the states and territory. And an emphasis in any treatment system so that it's based on emotions and feelings, not behaviour. There was a strong feeling that just because you're not exhibiting behaviour that might be seen as socially not okay, that doesn't mean that you're okay, that you're feeling well and happy, and you might need to be able to access some services regardless of how you're seen to be, you know, whether you're behaving in a socially acceptable manner or not. A strong view that we retain the 18 sessions that are available under the Better Access program, and that also there's a humanistic approach, a recognition that there are many features of the current mental health system that are experienced as traumatising and re-traumatising, and so in building any service system to happen across the country, we don't want it to be traumatising and repeating trauma that people have already experienced. So I think that probably draws together pretty well the major points.
Can we just recognise that all of you in some way contributed to those points that are up there? So this is not information being told at you, it's information that you participated in supplying. And I think you need to give yourselves a round of applause for that. Give yourselves a round of applause. Now, I'd like to ask for your assistance. The approach that I see could work is that we start off with one of those things and we allow the panel to speak. But I also am aware that there may be individuals in the audience that, as a panel member says something, would like to perhaps ask some more clarifying questions. So rather than us hold all of the questions till the end, we can allow some questions to take place through the panel. Is that okay with you? So if there's something that's a burning issue and you go, this is what I want to actually ask a question around, instead of trying to hold on to it till the end, we allow that to happen. Mic runners, can you just pop your hand up, please? We've got Dave over there, we've got Celeste over there, Robyn over here. They're the mic runners. Oh, I'm sorry, who have we got down there? Robyn. That's easy to remember. Okay, so what's going to happen is if you could just make sure that if you would like to ask a question, you pop your hand up really, really high. And I'm going to be the classroom cop and go, I think that hand went up first, and direct the closest mic runner to you. Now, because this is being filmed, I will repeat the question for the purpose of it being filmed. So it's not perhaps that we haven't all heard you, so don't think she's going, oh, patronising old cow up there. It's for the purpose of filming, okay? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let's commence with this panel. What a power panel this is, by the way. I'm going to start off for the purpose of activity of moving. Ruth, you've been sitting there for a while, time to do some work, really. Now, when you look at those 9 points that are up there, and I hope you've sort of managed to get a little bit of a transcript of what those 9 points are up there, is there anything there that surprises you? That you think, wow, I don't know if I would have seen that in the 9 points earlier?
Well, and firstly, I have to confess that I wasn't here earlier, so these have been given. No, there is nothing that surprises me. What pleases me, I think, and it reflects, I guess, the richness of the discussion, is that this is an across-the-board answer, isn't it? Right, from community awareness, general community, right through to the pointy end of treatment, and the broader treatment system as well, because I think it really is reflecting the importance of the primary care sector as well as the state-funded and the privatised. So no, it doesn't surprise me. I think it's a great list. I could probably expand on all of them, but I'm sure everyone else on the panel could expand on all of them too.
Well, let's pass over now. Robyn, if I come to you, is there a particular point there that you think is pertinent for all of those people that you manage? I mean, we talked very briefly before about training and skill development, but is there anything there that you think, well, maybe we can implement, or maybe we can add, or maybe we could do all sorts of things too?
No.
Okay. I just love it when that happens. Really love it. Okay.
Look, there's so much, I'm overwhelmed. And like Ruth, I think it's fantastic that there is a broad, response and responsibility doesn't sit in any one place in this. And I've been thinking about where some of where the place is that I need to take responsibility. And I think, I can't say any more than that. What's on my mind, though, is about trauma. And I've been thinking more and more about trauma and about the fact that mental health services, and I can talk about the public sector, don't recognise trauma, regardless of whoever it is. We don't. And when that kind of finally, that penny dropped for me, I was really dismayed and saddened by that. And I think most people in this room probably know that mental health services don't recognise trauma, but I think the people walking down the street would be kind of blown away by the fact that I've just said that.
And Robyn, absolutely, I think I and others would applaud you for that candour. Yeah. So thank you for that. If you did have the ability and that we could turn one of Auntie Joy's leaves here into a magic wand from a systemic position, and maybe others might want to add to this as well, what needs to be done to recognise... How much time have we got? No.
I'll just hand it over to Claire.
Yeah. Anyone can pick up there. What do we need to do? We're talking about trauma now, to recognise trauma in real existence. We talked about Robyn's position of the public health sector.
I think it's all of these. I certainly don't think it's all about money. I think money helps, but I would prefer to have a waiting list of staff who are able to recognise trauma and work in a different way and then go and get the money than simply throw more money at a broken system.
So we're talking about cultural change perhaps too, and mindset belief change as well. Would anyone else like to pick up on that?
Yes, something that came out of the workshop I was in was the crying need, and we heard it this morning when we had the Indigenous welcome. Again, not trauma, not being recognised for what it is. How sad that the reality of what's normal in the human experience. And the people in the workshop I was in were saying, well, there's no actual one definition of trauma out there. How dare there be a hierarchy of trauma? So perhaps clear definitions.
So clarity. Okay. I'm going to, because Senator Moore, I know you're busting to say something, around the systemic changes that may need to take place through your lens.
Well, that has to be based on having people giving their views, and I think the advisory committees, which people talk about, are crucial in terms of government policy. And I think the first one looks at cultural change, and that's a professional change as well. So it comes into the training aspect, and politicians don't write training manuals. They daren't go into that area. It's got to be the people with that, and we talk about lived experience, so it's the people who work as carers, it's the people who are consumers, it's the people who have chosen to work in this field, and that has to be acknowledged as well. No one's forced to work in the areas of professional service. It's something they choose to do. So I think that cultural change has to go through the professional bodies as much as anything else. So it's a huge balancing act. But I think where there's goodwill and where there seems to be such a genuine consensus that there needs to be change, that should be the first step towards making the change happen.
Okay, thank you. Indigo, you had your hand up there. There was something you wanted to respond to there.
Sure. Yeah, look, I'm just so heartened to hear us naming trauma as such a central issue to borderline. And I really hope this goes a lot further, and that also really includes broad definitions of trauma, because it's a very individual experience. And also that we don't just look at particularly traumatising experiences, but the context in which that's happened in someone's life, because I think that's critical as well. And in the consumer group, we were talking about how often it was the responses to a trauma and what happened in our lives afterwards that had the deepest impact on us. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. And I guess just the other point I wanted to make around systemic change, my role in sort of advocating for consumer voices is I would really love to see consumers, as part of any education or cultural change campaign, being given the platform to tell our stories about trauma, about recovery, and about the traumatising experience or the re-traumatising experience of going through hospital, particularly involuntary admissions, which can be very damaging.
Thank you. There is a hand here. I think this is the only hand so far. Is that correct? Anyone else got a hand up as we make our way? Thanks. Thanks, Flick. Okay.
I just had a question for Senator Moore. Just wondering what your opinion is on point number 8, retaining the 18 sessions under the Better Access Scheme.
Okay, before you answer, Senator Moore, I've got to be Polly Parrott here. A question to Senator Moore about the 18 sessions.
What a genuinely surprising question. In terms of what the government is doing, and we've had this discussion in many places, is we're rebalancing the expenditure, and the decision about the 18 sessions is actually balanced against investment in other areas. Now, that discussion is going on in terms of areas, and we're in the middle of an inquiry at the moment where we've had a lot of people come and see us about the issue of the 18 sessions. I would think everybody in this room knows about the evaluation of the system and how few people in the country actually used 18 sessions, if you look at the drop-off rate along there. So what we've got to do is put further work into why that happened. What was it that caused people to take certain periods of time and their treatment, and what's the best possible treatment that we're going to use? So that's the background. We're looking at the budget and how we best spend the money, and that's where we're at. So at this stage, the government is looking at maintaining our policy. So, but I'm happy to talk with anyone about this, but it's been on the agenda now for a long time, and certainly there are mixed views about this area. And in fact, in this whole field, there are always mixed views about what's the best way of doing things. So I'm not surprised the issue is raised. Though it wasn't raised in the workshop I was in. I was kind of expecting it to be so, and it wasn't. So we'll keep talking about it, but that's the background to the decision.
Claire, could you hand that to Merinda, whose hand is up, and then Ruth?
My comment's very short, and it's with great respect to Claire, but I wonder whether the government's heard of means testing.
Okay.
I mean, I just, it just seems so obvious to me that those 18 sessions need to go to people who don't have money, and people who do have money can buy it.
Ruth.
I just wanted to chip in a bit because I'm sure that somewhere this morning the issue of engagement and time to change and that sort of notion came up. And I think this is just a real tension for governments and departments to balance access, which means access to more people, over depth or duration. And it's certainly, I mean, when I see, like Robyn, I think, when I see a comment that a system is traumatising and re-traumatising, you think, oh dear, that is such a terrible thing to hear. And yet I also know that a lot of the services are almost like they're at the front line because they have to manage what's knocking on the door, and we're trying to improve access. But if you improve access, at times what the casualty is longevity, is depth. And that's something we should all have a debate about, and that's part of the debate about the 6 to 12 to 18 sessions.
Certainly worth the debate. Flick, did I see your hand up? No, the lady behind. Okay. Flick, was it you? You just want the mic? Okay. Can we get a mic, Robyn, please?
Thank you. I've been trying to work out what's going on in my body at the moment, and I've been feeling shame. And it was the point at which we talked about burden, that I'm a burden to carers. And I never, ever want that to be said again or thought again, because that is excruciating to hear, and that's re-traumatising for me, that I am somehow the problem and that I am a burden. And I really need that to be heard. That's the first thing. The second thing is I want to talk a little bit more about trauma and shame, because the way we talk about trauma, I've been spending a lot of my life wondering, what is my trauma? Where's this? Like, I must have something. Why else am I so effed up? And I have actually found a lot of things. One of them's invalidation, though. Invalidation and neglect. There's a lot of work about the links between invalidation and self-harm. And I'm feeling a little bit, how do I say this? If this agenda moves forward without keeping listening to consumers, you are re-traumatising us. Because if our experiences are of neglect, invalidation, so locking us up is re-traumatising us in the kind of most overt forms of trauma, but not listening to us. So many of the consumers in the consumer workshop talked about nobody listens. I just want to be heard. I want someone to listen. I want someone to care about what happened to me and to actually listen. And I feel there's a part of me that doesn't have hope about that persistent listening, partly because I work with Merinda, who's been saying this stuff for 20 years. And I'm like, why has the system not changed when she's been saying this stuff for a very long time? And I don't mean to say that in a negative, pessimistic way, but that's actually a real, I guess it's a comment, not a question.
Okay.
But shame and trauma, what are you going to do about it? And how is the system going to change and stop neglecting us, invalidating us, and re-traumatising us?
Now, taking on board that point, can I just get a response from the panel to some of the comments that Flick said? Isabell?
Look, I'd just like to reaffirm what Flick has said, and one of the things is that I've now been advocating for people now for 20 years, and basically that means listening, because that's what advocacy is about. And while we've had 20 years of reform and we've seen major changes, the tragedy is that consumers are still complaining about the same thing. Doesn't matter what diagnosis, they're still complaining about the same thing. And you say to yourself, well, where have we gone wrong? Because in my 20 years of advocacy, I've probably only met about 5 clinicians where I've thought or I've said to them, you should not be allowed near a patient. Most people, 99% of the clinicians I've met, and people, they're good people and they want to do good. I wouldn't want to be quoted about that though.
Is the Herald sign out there?
Where we
No.
go wrong, I
The
think,
age?
is that the people who make the changes and the reforms and things like that are constantly looking at the big picture. And that doesn't matter whether it's at a state level or a hospital level or at a national level. The issues concerning consumers don't fit into the big picture. They're the little picture stuff. That is about how people are treated, whether they're heard, listened to, and all of those sorts of things. And the thing that I've learned is I've learnt more from consumers, because when I started off working in mental health, I was a clinician, I didn't have a mental illness. And it was consumers who taught me about mental illness. I learnt more from them than I ever learnt from a clinician. A clinician gave me a clinical profile about schizophrenia and stuff like that. Consumers gave me the information that I think is important, is about what they experience as a consumer. Consumers, no matter what the diagnosis, have expertise that no other group have. They know what works, they know what doesn't work, and what we should be doing. If we want to change, and it's talking about having hope, I often talk about we constantly break the hearts of consumers, because we talk about developing these policies and all of this sort of stuff, and they get excited and they get hope and things like that, only to have come crashing down again because we don't listen. And to my mind, to get the things on the agenda that are really important for consumers so that they believe that the reform is meeting their needs, we actually have to use the expertise of consumers about what works and what doesn't. And from that information, we then develop the policies. What we're doing at the moment is we've been responding for the last 20 years to everybody else's agenda, and nobody responds to ours.
Okay, thank you, Isabell. Madam, I know you've got a question, but I just want to keep going from, I think this is a response from Flick's comments. Now, I need to point out a bit of an error that's taking place in front of you. Everyone knows that this is not Isabell, right? And everyone knows that this is not Sathya. We're all good with that? Oh, okay. Sathya, would you like to speak? Yes.
To my mind, when I look at those 9 points, it feels like it can be summarized into 3 points. One is, how do we improve access? That's number 1. Number 2, how do we educate and train everybody and change the current culture? Third is, how do we increase the awareness? Awareness, again, comes under training and education. So it's mainly we are talking about how do we improve the access and deliver better services, and how do we train and teach people so that they don't do the same kind of mistakes which Flick has been talking about, Merinda has been talking about, all of us have been talking about. How do we get the clinicians to listen more? How do we get clinicians, carers and consumers, everybody to talk together and listen to each other? It's a huge challenge. So I used to head the psychiatry training program for Victoria until about a few months ago. I'm
Don't
very
hold that against him.
painfully aware that we do so little in terms of training. And maybe Joe and I get about 8 hours, 12 hours a year to train. So there's very little of education happening. So I see that we can always have more funding, and we can endlessly ask for more funding. Of course, we should ask for more funding. I'm not denying that at all. But more funding in itself is not going to change the problem. We could put in either $50 million, but still it wouldn't answer Flick's question, it wouldn't answer Merinda's question, it wouldn't really change the culture. So we need to do both. I see that as being a very important part. Okay. Educating the clinicians and changing the culture. You mentioned about culture change. I think that's really the crucial thing. But I'm an optimist, though. Even if you look at the last couple of years, so much has changed. We have had a national expert reference group set up, and we have had the NHMRC looking at developing guidelines, and we have had Julien, Leith launching the borderline BPD Awareness Day, and we have Andrew Channon, who heads the International Personality Disorder Society. So we have had a huge amount of changes happening in the last few years. I think that gives a a great deal of optimism.
Okay, thank you. So Flick, technically I was supposed to say what the question was, and there is not a hope that I'm going to be able to articulate what you said in your comments. Can we hold that maybe we may come back to you and ask you to do a sort of a version of your transcript of those things so that they're recorded as potentially a resource here as well? Okay. There's a mic. Can we just come over here to the mic here? Please.
Sorry. Flick did actually say a lot of what my concerns were on behalf of my daughter. So I basically agree with her.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Thank
Second
you.
on Flick's comments. Thank you. I noticed a hand up here before. Fred. Fred, you've got a question?
Yeah, it's a question for the whole panel, and I acknowledge everything that Flick said over there. I've been a carer of a person with a personality disorder and also work with carers in a public mental health system. I look through the list here, and every one of those things on there are very legitimate. We've got training and skill development, which we would put that as being the workforce. And then we've got all the things around the consumer, and it needs to be centred on the consumer. There's one glaring, huge omission from that, and I'd like the panel's opinion on it, is what about the support, information and education for those that live with our consumers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Why is that not in that top 9?
Okay, thank you. The question from the floor was, the list is very, very legitimate, particularly the note around the training and the education, but there was a comment related to it seemed to be very consumer orientated. Is that a correct? And it does need to be, of course. The support and the information to carers. And the question goes to the panel, what about the carer support and information? Julien? And education.
Yeah, look, thank you for... It's working?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Fred, isn't it? Yeah. I think it was supposed to be included in the point number 1 under training and skills development, information, education, etc. Perhaps it doesn't quite cut it in terms of the involvement as well, but it wasn't meant to be excluded. We were faced with a challenge in sort of 10 minutes to try and condense everything, but you've drawn our attention to it rightly, and I think we can certainly include, my view would be that we had meant to include that really, but it's gone in under that, and it should be, in my opinion, an additional point.
Okay, thank you.
Fred, just from my point of view, which is sometimes these things end up being recommendations for policy, I would have read carer into most of those. If it come from this group, I would have read that in, that this was looking at the whole range of need across the board. So maybe the words need to be specifically written there, but just from a policy development process, I would have read this to include consumers and carers and families and community in each of those dot points.
So I think the point has been made that the language needs to be inclusive of both consumers and carers. Okay, there was one other hand up first. Merinda, go.
Look, I'm going to sound a little bit controversial here, but actually almost none of them mention the word consumer either. And I think we can get into this stupid gamesmanship of adding carers here and then adding consumers there and then adding carers. And I think that's a particularly dangerous approach to it, to be perfectly honest. I think that I want to tell you very quickly about a term that I use now, because I won't use the word stakeholder. I find that language offensive, but I'm using language that was created, it's called a critical reference group, and that's us people who are the people who are done to and done on, which some people call consumers, other people call other things. And there's a centrality about our position that is unique. Carers have an important position, but not the same centrality. And I think that we need to be very careful about creating a competition of where we're going to put all this language. I don't think it gets us anywhere, and we'll end up undoing all the good that's been done the rest of the day. I think that I agree with Claire. I think that we have all day had this good faith, that it's the inclusion of everybody in all the points. I would have also read carer into that. I don't think they're missing. I think that under point 1, you could actually maybe put them first or something like that. But I really think we really don't want to undo all the good work that's been done to try and bring groups together. And once we start competing about how many words consumers and how many words carers, I think it's a problem.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to, there's no questions from the floor just yet. Sorry, I'll hold on to that one. I'm going to introduce a couple of people that we haven't heard yet. Janne McMahon here. I want to take you to your thoughts around point 5, which is the change of name. We've sort of heard a fair bit today around the name, the label, the stigmatisation that may go with that label, people's experience around that. Have you got particular views around that yourself?
Look, I have, and again, this might not be a very popular thing to say. I totally accept that there is so much difficulty around the title of borderline personality disorder for a whole range of reasons. It's discriminatory, it's stigmatising, people don't feel good about it, clinicians don't like to give that diagnosis knowing that their patient or the consumer won't necessarily be able to access services from that point on. But I guess I have a view that so long as this is embedded in the DSM-5 or the ICD 11 reviews, I think we're stuck with it. As much as we would not like to have it, but I think we have. So in my mind, I think that I would rather see BPD and the issues around that be addressed, to really look at it, and rather than put it aside, to say this is an acceptable mental illness, and let's get on with it, and let's really treat people with this label of whatever you like to call it, and let's make those attitudinal and cultural changes, and let's get this diagnosis where it should be alongside every other mental illness.
Again, panel members, is there anyone on the panel that would like to respond on that point 5 there, the change of name, if that's close to heart?
Look, I have to say I hate the name because I think people with that nobody's born with a good self-image, and by the time you reach adulthood, you don't have to have a mental illness to know that your sense of self is stuffed, and people can undermine it fairly readily, and you see that all the time. But I think people with that diagnosis have a particular damaged sense of self, and to have a diagnosis of personality disorder is it's just not helpful. Having said that, I also don't think that a change of the name is going to be sufficient to change the attitudes. Mm-hmm. And I think some people are more unrealistically hopeful about that, and I think if we change the way we deliver the service and we do make it humanistic and empathetic and all of those sorts of things, we're going to have a much better outcome for people than concentrating on changing a name.
Okay. Sathya?
I agree with both of you that change in name itself is not going to change the culture. However, we keep hearing from clients again and again and again that the very word borderline is very invalidating. I think we need to listen to them. However, I don't think we can make the change within Australia. There's a lot of discussion happening around the globe, and science is progressing. Once we learn more about this disorder, maybe in the years to come, there'll be a change of name. I wonder whether we could ask Andrew to make a comment. I'm sure he's in a better position to make a comment about this. Looking at the...
Can we get a mic to Andrew, please? Andrew. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Shannon has now got the mic.
I need that when I come home from work, you know. I think the issue with the name risks actually getting mired down and creating huge internal battles among people who want to work together to achieve change. And I think it highlights everybody doesn't like the name, but nobody can agree on an alternative. And for every person who wants to call it complex post-traumatic stress disorder, someone else wants to call it emotion regulation disorder. And in fact, I think that what's stigmatising or degrading or shame-inducing is actually the attitudes and demeanour of people that use the label. And I think one of the choices we have is a little bit like what happened with schizophrenia in the 1980s, where it's a label that is equally meaningless, equally associated with negative attitudes, and a decision was taken to try and rehabilitate the name rather than to change it for the similar reasons that it's difficult to find an alternative that is actually satisfactory to everybody involved in the field. So there will be no borderline personality disorder it doesn't exist in ICD-10 anyway. There's an emotionally unstable personality disorder, borderline type. But actually in ICD-11 there's going to be no borderline personality disorder. So people have got what they wish for, but actually in the ICD-11 people might not like the solution that people have come up with as to what to call these problems. So if you want to achieve consensus in the field, it's been tried. I think it proves it extremely difficult. I think the other aspect, I know Merinda, you're itching to say something, but the other aspect is I think, you know, there's an aspect of presenting old wine in new bottles, that the problem becomes you can relabel it. And actually that was why we chose the name HYPE for our program, because we didn't want a stigmatising label. And in fact, it doesn't matter. People say, this person looks a bit hypey, you know. So it's the fact that there is interpersonal distress and relational difficulties associated with the problem that are at the heart of the problem that cause the distress among clinicians and carers and consumers and mean that actually there is distress and debate about the disorder. So I'm not sure that changing the name achieves what we hope, although I absolutely agree it's a meaningless name that doesn't convey much.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. A comment regarding what we're talking about here? Okay, thank you. A question from the audience here.
Just to reflect upon what you said, I think language is extremely important, and having a shared language is extremely important. That's very centre of everything we talk about today. We have a name that everyone really has agreed has negative connotations. It attacks the person's personality, which leads to more trauma, which we've discussed at length today. And so changing attitude, everything else that we put on top of that, and the changing in attitude, which includes the changing of language and changing those things around, it is central around that. And I don't agree that that alone will change things, but why not do both?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great comment. Now, do you want to double dip and ask a question?
No, I'd like to hear what Merinda's got to say.
Okay. Merinda.
I'm probably going to say something that people aren't going to expect me to say, but I'm going to liken it to the word consumer, which is very highly unpopular by many people, including many people in the consumer movement. And I get highly irritated with people who want to take a discussion right off track by talking about the word consumer. I just say, go lump it. It's the one we're using. It's not the best. It's the best we've got for the moment. Shut up and talk about the issues we really want to talk about. And I think that as much as I will never describe myself as having borderline. That's my choice. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. But at a political level, I think we might like to look at it in a different sort of way. And at a political level, there might be place for us saying we can't change that horrible language. We need to actually make it less harmful, whatever. But we all know that that's a political act being done for specifically that reason, and that those of us are able, with the clinicians with whom we work, to use the language that we want to use that is least traumatising. And for me, that is not. It is, for me, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I luckily have a clinician who agrees with me, and I probably wouldn't continue to see her if she did not. And I stick with that. But I'm prepared to be able to see two worlds at once and see that at a political level we might make some different decisions.
Okay, thanks, Merinda. Now, can I go all Tony Jones and put a line under that one just for the moment, because we have got a lot of other points that we can cover there. Ladies, I'm aware I've got a couple of hands up there. Were they questions related to what was just being spoken about? Well, just wait for a minute. Come to you in a soon, okay? All right, I'm going to ask Sue McLean from representing the private sector here. One of the things that we're seeing on point 7 there, that humanistic approach, and also I'll sort of probably categorise it, and I shouldn't do this because I wasn't part of the process, but the emphasis or focus on treatment based on emotions and feelings, not behaviours. Your views around that, particularly through the lens of the private sector?
I think we're very fortunate within the private sector. Can you hear me?
Can we do a mic check on that one then?
Yeah. I think we're very lucky in the private sector. I know you've drawn a line under the last question or the last topic, but certainly we have a very small percentage of patients who are admitted to private hospitals across Australia who have a diagnosis of Axis 1 or Axis 2 of borderline personality disorder. That does not mean that we don't treat people with complex concerns and issues, and that could fall within that category. Certainly, I like to think that we manage all patients within the private sector. In fact, when I worked in the public sector, in a humanistic point of view, and always respectful. That doesn't always happen. One of the things that have resonated with me today is this word relational, and I actually think that's probably the theme for today, certainly from my point of view. It's about relational key supports, be they clinicians, be they with health services, but also within the community. And I think that really one of the take-home messages for me is actually about the attitudinal viewpoint and how we can improve the relationship for every person in terms of acceptance.
Okay, thank you. Lovely points. If we can pick that thread up there, and if we had a look at community awareness, if we expand it out in that relational perspective. Community awareness, any views, any ideas around thoughts on how we make that take place? Great aspiration. What's the how-to for community awareness?
This is everybody wants to be a millionaire.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that certainly one of the things that we try and do is actually do some education in schools. And I think that really we're very fortunate within the private sector because we do have the capacity to do some of these interesting initiatives that perhaps we hope pay dividends. Certainly I think that there's really a key to having ongoing relationships with your treatment teams, and also the ability to link in with some of the community. Certainly public sector do a fantastic job, but sometimes are somewhat stymied by their ability.
Mm-hmm. Other panel members, is it a case of being so crude to say we need to be better marketers of the message and sellers of the message? And in such, do we use some techniques that perhaps are being used elsewhere? Merinda's shaking her head. Okay, so what we're talking about is community awareness. How do we increase community awareness? The point I was attempting to link it to is, do we need to become better marketers of what we know rather than speakers of what we know? Do we need to actually take on board some of the aspects of selling a message like other people tend to?
I just tell you, really, I'm unconvinced. And remember the last slide that I showed, where the degree of oppression in the community was so small. So if we're going to take the message to the community, we've got to be really clear that what we're taking them isn't something that's going to make it worse.
Okay,
That's
good
my
point.
concern.
Good point. Good point. A couple of other hands were up just then. Oh, here they are. They're little hands. Give me a big hand. Good-o. Thanks, Indigo.
Can you hear me?
Cool.
Yeah, I agree with Merinda. I think, yeah, awareness is always important, but I'm thinking, what are we going to be putting out there, the current attitudes that exist in the mental health system, because I don't want to see that spread any further than we've already got. And I guess my other concern around community awareness is if we're raising awareness, we're going to be seeing even more people coming into services and then getting turned away and re-traumatised. So my sense is that we really need to look at the services we've got in place first before we start raising awareness out there, because I think there's a potential to do harm.
Okay, all right, easy. Isabell?
Look, before I make this comment, I'd like a commitment from everybody in the audience that I be allowed to leave this building alive.
I'd take a bullet for you, Isabell. I'll jump in front.
Thank you. One of the thoughts that I had about, you know, and I accept and respect what Merinda and Indigo have said, but that if we were going to run because of the stigma with BPD, is that I think Beyond Blue get a significant amount of money, and this is the thing I'm suggesting, is that we expand, because it is confined really to depression and anxiety and all of that sort of stuff. We should stop that and expand the diagnoses, and because they're rolling in millions, we could use some of that money for an anti-stigma campaign for BPD. Please let me leave alone.
Please just let me comment on that.
Public declaration from Dee Backman-Hoyle, who is also an endorsed ambassador and keynote speaker for Beyond Blue. Me. Okay. I need to admit that out in the open.
I just felt the need to I felt the need to respond and say that another option, just expanding the options, is that we also have a program that unlike Beyond Blue isn't rolling in millions and has no ongoing funding whatsoever, called Voices Vic, which works on very hard at promoting community awareness and also awareness within the mental health system about consumer-oriented views about recovery and new ways of working with recovery and the importance of addressing trauma. So we could also look at expanding the mission of Voices Vic and actually getting some funding.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would like, and it's a consumer-led organisation.
All right.
Just throwing that
Dr. Sathya, could you just hold off for a moment, because I can't resist coming to Dr. Ruth Vine as we talk about the reallocation of funding. I think that's what's happening now, isn't it? The reallocation of funding.
About which I have nothing to do. I just might need to make it plain. The chief psychiatrist
Perhaps your influence.
but it's a how can you win a Beyond Blue argument? I'm with Isabell, actually. I think Beyond Blue has created a brand, and it's a very successful brand. And it quite often happens in other areas of the world that when you have a successful brand, the list of products grows. And so I think that should be thought about. But I think it's next week that is this thing called Mental Health Week. And it's a thing. And it has launches, and people have put a lot of effort into it, and it is meant to be about raising awareness about a whole range of things to do with mental health, and also about decreasing stigma. And yet, I don't think I've heard a peep about it. So we're just not very good. We are not good at raising community awareness, and Beyond Blue has done that very well, and I think we need to recognise that. So. What was your question?
I was just going to try and corner for where's the money going to come from. But that's okay. Can I hand over to Claire, please?
The whole issue of stigma generally in this area of mental health has been on the agenda for a long time, and people are afraid of it. They're afraid of how to do it well, where it would go, does it cause harm, all those things. But the debate is still raging, and I think it's important to have the debate. I've been lucky, and I would imagine that you're going to have some comments, so that'll be great. I've been lucky in actually having a look at a mate of mine who went overseas and studied this stuff, who did a Churchill Fellowship, and seen the work he's brought back, particularly from Scotland and also from New Zealand. And I'm worried about New Zealand's mental health if they don't win the World Cup. But in terms of the way they handle these things, they're more overt than us, and I think we can learn from them. And I think all our issues, because what we're talking about is people being well and healthy and respected. So that's wider than any subgroup, I think. So this area of stigma needs to be addressed, and I think the debate's still raging. And for what it's worth, I think we should be doing it. And then when my minister sees this film, he'll enjoy that. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Now, I'm aware that, Andrew, you've got a comment there. I know that, Flick, you had a comment too. But there were two ladies that I completely shut down before who, have you left because you're offended? No, your hands are still up. Can I just let these two ladies go first? Okay, can we get a mic, Dave? Can we get a... Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Celeste.
My question just to anyone on the panel was, what's the kind of best advice you'd give a young person, say 18 or 20, who's just walked out of the doctor's office and been told they had borderline personality disorder?
Okay, question from the audience is, what is the best advice that you would give to a young person, 18, 19, who has just walked out of the doctor's office being told that they have borderline personality disorder? Panel. Anyone? Dr. Sathya, would you like to pick that one up?
I would say go back to the doctor and ask for more treatment, more help. Can I also go back and comment about the awareness? We had concerns expressed.
That will be answered in a minute. Just hang on a minute.
Yeah, the answer to that question is that go back to the clinician or the doctor who will give you the diagnosis and discuss more. And
so don't leave the office potentially unless you feel that you've got an understanding to a degree.
And
some head nods, some head shakes.
And demand for more education and access and find out more about it. And you go back and read about it yourself and learn about it and try and see what best you can do to access more treatment. There are treatments available. There are people who are still willing to work with these difficulties.
Okay.
We can just go back and make a comment about the awareness campaign. I hear the concerns expressed saying that if we increase the awareness, we're going to have more people turning up for services, and we don't have adequate access, or we have a lot of problems when we do provide service. So should we not do the awareness at all? The problem I hear that and I share the concern. The problem I have with that is there's so much of misinformation in the community right now. Are we going to just let it be? People learn from Hollywood movies, Girl Interrupted, those kind of movies. And there's so much of bad information, wrong information, misinformation. Are we going to leave it just as it is? So that's a problem I have. Maybe we need to look at a very careful, well thought through, thoughtful campaign and awareness. And even this day, today, is part of the awareness.
Absolutely.
So we need to be careful. I think we need to adhere to the caution.
Okay, thank you. Flick, you had your hand up first and then Andrew.
Thanks. I was almost bursting because I'm writing my PhD on awareness campaigns, and I could not... The idea of expanding Beyond Blue's campaign, yes, it's successful, but what's it successful at? It's successful at normalising depression and anxiety. So depression and anxiety can happen to anyone, unlike those other illnesses that really crazy people get, is my reading of what Beyond Blue has done. And it's also created a sense that depression and anxiety are the kinds of things that they happen to anyone. What about if your depression is so debilitating that you are really hard to be around because it's really, really confronting, or your anxiety? Like I've written a chapter of my thesis about Beyond Blue. I could go on for a very long time about this. What I would say as a positive is what they're doing in New Zealand, like minds, like mine. I want this in Australia. What it is it's a multi-layered awareness campaign that is based on grassroots, people going and talking, because people are yearning to talk about this stuff. Not just consumers, but everyone wants to talk, wants to hear, wants to actually engage with these issues. Billboards, to me, are the most... That tells you what you should think. And I call this benevolent othering. It's like, you should be nice, you should think all these positive things, and let's not talk about the hard stuff. And to me, that's actually damaging in really profound ways. And, you know, Beyond Blues also gets a lot of money, so it's really good at marketing, basically. Is that what we really want to do, just be good at marketing? And yes, I'd love to be good at marketing, but I actually want to have a sophisticated response to a really complex community issue, you know, that isn't just about pathologising individuals and telling everyone else how nice they should be to us, or, you know, how they should respond in benevolent ways, but actually listens to everyone, and I do really take that question about carers, you know, about if you live with someone 24/7 and you are at your wit's end, you don't know what to do. And I've had people in my life in that experience, and I don't know what to say to them, and I think it's cruel to ignore that experience. But I think that we need to have community conversations, and that's what Like Minds, Like Mine does. New Zealand is already doing it, and I don't know why we don't do it. There's a conference next week about anti-stigma campaigns in Queensland, and I'm terrified of what they're going to come out with, particularly around borderline. What could you possibly say about borderline in an awareness campaign? I've got to take credit for these stickers getting the attention it deserves. Took a long time, actually, for me to work that out, but it's actually about addressing a lot of stuff. It's not just about being benevolent, it's actually about really tackling the hard stuff.
Beautifully said again. Note to
another
camera,
rant.
I cannot repeat that. It was excellent. Thank you, Andrew.
I just wanted to add and ask a question that I wonder whether we're underestimating, well, number one, underestimating the public, and number two, whether we're colluding with the shame by not talking about it. And I think it's a genuine question because I agree, there are risks as well as potential benefits from having a public awareness campaign. I think the potential risks have been well articulated, but a lot of the difficulties, a lot of the shame and a lot of the what people call stigma associated with the disorder is an artefact of the lack of availability of services, the lack of skills in individuals to listen, the lack of skills to actually understand the experience of others. And it's not they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, I suppose. I think that it can be possible to raise the profile of BPD at the same time as provide the skills in the workforce and in members of the community to actually understand the experience of others. And I think to some extent it's coming whether we like it or not. People might not be aware, I thought it would have been discussed so far, that actually Marsha Linehan came out in the New York Times, major article in the New York Times saying that she has BPD, or had BPD. So these things, you know, eventually hit us from the States. And you heard Perry Hoffman talking about that footballer, that American footballer that got the publicity. If it was any other sport, probably that would have made the news here. But the fact is there is a wave of public declarations that I think is just starting, and so it's going to hit us. So we're probably better off being prepared for that rather than waiting for it to just happen and get all the negative stuff that comes along with that inevitably will follow.
Thank you, Andrew. As we look at time right now, we have time for just the final comments from panel members here, please. Has anyone got anything burning that they'd like to say? Janne?
Yes, I have got something burning that I'd like to say. Uniting Care Wesley has a fabulous website, and it's around social justice. And it talks very much about patient or person-centred care. And in my mind, and it articulates, and it really came home to me, and I think this is what BPD is all about really. And they talk about instead of policymakers and others developing a service and expecting the consumer to fit that service, putting the consumer at the centre and making it person-centred is to look at the needs and the requirements of the consumer and build a service around that. And I think that very few of us, if any, consumers and carers out there may have been asked to be involved in the budget rollouts, the Headspace, the Epic, the ATAPs and a range of others. And it really seems to me that the focus around borderline personality disorder has in the main been a consumer and carer push. And I think that is extraordinary. I think that is absolutely extraordinary, that it's been a build-up of consumers and carers saying, enough. We need to do something. We need to have services. We need to have a focus. And the current situation will not do.
Okay, thank you. We're going to finish on that point. Thank you. Can we give you a point?
And one last point, I'm going to pack up my sign and go home. I've got a flight to catch. Okay. But look, I'm excited and I'm thrilled that BPD Awareness Day has taken place, and I'd certainly like to acknowledge everybody, and let's roll it out this time next year.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it goes without saying that a rich conversation like this could go on for hours, absolute hours, and we don't have that luxury. But what we do have coming your way now is some refreshments and some entertainment, and I'm sure our panel will be around if you did have that burning question for any of the panel members to have a chat with them at this time that's coming up. I would like to now ask us to thank the panel very much. Can we thank the panel, please? Could I ask, please, that Dr. Sathya now come to the lectern or use the mic?
I just want to very quickly acknowledge one special person who really made this meeting, conference, event, awareness day, whatever you want to call it, happen. I'm sure there's been a huge number of people who have made this day happen, but this wouldn't have happened but for Julien and Leith. And Julien, you're truly inspirational. Thank you very much.
You had something to say as well.
Yes, look, thank you, Sathya, but I also want to point out that this whole thing came around originally because Sathya Rao came to a meeting of the Victorian Mental Health Carers Network and really laid on the line just, what, well, the situation we've all been listening to for the whole of today, and his really passion about this is what inspired the network to take this up and to create this conference. So that was really the beginning of it, and clearly it's a real need. We've just been amazed by the response that we got. As I said before, this morning this was full. Ours were full. We were worried about OC health and safety. We had the other room set up with 50 people in watching it on a screen. So clearly there's a big need for these sorts of discussions. So I also wanted to thank Dee and Rolf for doing a fantastic job. Dee as an MC has
Thanks,
just
Julie.
been terrific. I'm sure you will all agree.
Thank you.
And Rolf in the sidelines back there has done a great job. So thank you, Rolf. And also a big thank you to Darabin, particularly to Nishan Phillips and to Craig. Nishan has been just fantastic in being so flexible in managing the huge crowd we had, this morning and over the lunch hour. He was very flexible and helpful in managing all that, in setting up the conference. So a big thank you to Nishan and Darabin, and to Craig, who's done a great job also on being the tech in the side wings there. So if you could put your hands together, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe is there alcohol? Because that will make a difference if people stay. There is, okay. Please join us for a celebratory drink and the auction of our fantastic painting that is coming up. Thank you all to you for contributing your time to this day.